Chapter 10. Doughs, Batters, Structure. From the World Cooking Systems Atlas. After this chapter, you will not look at a recipe for pancake batter or biscuit dough the same way. You will see, underneath the ingredient list, a small set of variables: gluten, fat, water, leavening, heat, time, being tuned toward a particular time shape, the shape the food will take as it transforms from liquid or paste into the structured thing the eater bites into. 1. The cook is building a shape over time. There is a moment in almost every baking failure where the cook stares at the pan and cannot name what went wrong. The pancake spread too thin. The biscuit came out as a brick. The cinnamon roll's crumb collapsed. The custard wept. The tempura batter sat on the shrimp like a wet sock instead of a crisp veil. Recipe followed. Ingredients correct. And yet the thing in the pan is not the thing the recipe promised. Most cooks read this as a problem of technique. I should have whisked longer. I should have rested it. I should have used colder butter. Sometimes that is the right diagnosis. More often, the cook has missed something earlier, a shape they were supposed to be building and didn't know they were building. A dough is not a list of ingredients. A batter is not a wet version of a dough. A custard is not a flavored liquid. Each is a structure assembled over time, and the cook's job is to know, before the bowl goes near the heat, what structure they are trying to build, and which variables they have to tune to build it. This chapter is about what a baker means by structure, and what a cook means by time shape: the rise here, the set there, the crisp on the outside, and the give on the inside. After reading it, you will be able to look at any dough or batter recipe and predict, before mixing, what the variables are doing. You will also be able to read a failure and name which variable was off, instead of repeating the recipe more carefully and hoping. 2. The master variables: gluten, fat, water, leavening. Almost everything the cook does between flour in a bowl and finished structure on a plate can be read as the tuning of 4 variables. These 4 are not the only things present. Heat and time will join them in section 3. But they are the dial set the cook turns when they decide what the matrix will be. The 4 are gluten, the protein network; fat, the network's enabler; water, the network's enabler; leavening, the network's expander. Each of these does one job. Each of them does that job in opposition to one of the others. The cook is constantly choosing how much of each, and when. Gluten, the protein network. Wheat flour, when wetted and worked, develops a network of 2 proteins, glutenin and gliadin, that we call gluten. The network is what gives bread its chew, what holds pasta dough into a sheet. Without gluten, a dough is just wet starch. With too much developed gluten, a tender thing, a biscuit, a pancake, a tempura coat, becomes a tough thing. The cook controls gluten in 3 ways. First, by the choice of flour. Bread flour has more protein than pastry flour. Second, by the choice to add water at all. A dry crumb mixture does not form gluten. Third, and most importantly, by the amount of mixing. Stirring a wet batter once is not the same operation as kneading a dough for 10 minutes. The first barely connects the strands. The second deliberately builds them into a long, springy mesh. Almost every dough or batter failure that produces a tough result is a gluten failure. Usually too much mixing, sometimes the wrong flour, occasionally both. Almost every failure that produces a structureless, collapsed result is the opposite: not enough gluten where it was needed. Fat, the interrupter. Fat is what stops gluten from forming a complete network. A fat-coated flour particle cannot easily link to its neighbor. This is why a biscuit, where cold butter is cut into the flour before any liquid arrives, comes out tender and flaky. The gluten is interrupted at the moment of formation. This is why brioche, a yeasted dough loaded with butter, takes much longer to develop strength than a lean baguette dough. The fat is constantly working against the network the kneading is trying to build. The cook's choice with fat is mostly when it goes in. Fat added before the water arrives, biscuit, pie pastry, choux, limits the gluten that can develop, full stop. Fat added after the gluten is already built, brioche, croissant lamination, sits inside the network, softening it but not preventing it. Fat added at the very end, the butter mounted into the finished sauce, the egg yolk in a finished custard, does almost no structural work. It does flavor and mouthfeel work, but the matrix is already set. A cake batter is, structurally, a dough where fat got there before water and won the argument. A biscuit is, structurally, a bread where fat got there before water and won the argument. The patterns repeat. Water, the enabler water. is what allows gluten to form at all, what dissolves sugar and salt and yeast nutrients, what gelatinizes starch under heat, what allows the network to be flexible enough to expand under steam. Without water, flour is a powder. The Cook's variable here is hydration, the ratio of water to flour. A pasta dough at around 50% hydration is dense and rollable. A pancake batter at 100% hydration is pourable. A choux paste, which is partly cooked on the stovetop before eggs are added, comes out as a thick paste because the starch has already absorbed and bound much of the water. The same flour, depending on hydration, becomes a sheet, a loaf, a paste, or a pour. Hydration also changes what the leavening can do. A wetter dough lets steam escape and lets bubbles expand more freely. This is why a high hydration bread dough produces an open, irregular crumb, and a tight dough produces a closed, even one. Leavening, the expander. Leavening is whatever introduces gas into the matrix. There are 4 common sources, and the cook should know which they are using. Yeast, a living organism that eats sugars and produces carbon dioxide over hours. Slow, gives complex flavor. Used in bread, brioche, cinnamon roll, pizza. Chemical leavener, baking powder, baking soda. Reacts on contact with liquid or heat. Gives no flavor depth on its own. Used in pancakes, biscuits, quick breads, cakes. Mechanical leavener, air beaten into eggs or whipped into cream. Fragile. The cook is creating the bubbles by hand before any heat. Used in soufflé, sponge, some pancakes. Steam, water vapor created by heat from water already in the dough. Used in choux paste, popovers, the puff in a properly fried tempura batter. The cook's choice of leavener determines the speed of the process. A yeasted dough wants hours of fermentation before baking. A pancake batter wants to go from bowl to griddle quickly because the baking powder has begun reacting the moment the wet met the dry. A choux paste wants to hit a very hot oven so the water inside can flash to steam before the structure sets around it. A great deal of why didn't it rise comes down to a mismatch between leavener and timing. The yeasted dough was rushed, the pancake batter was rested too long. The soufflé sat on the counter while the cook answered the door. Each of these is the wrong time shape for the leavener that was used. The 6 matrices, the variables in paragraph 2, are abstractions. The cook does not stand at the counter saying, "I will now tune hydration." They stand at the counter making a specific thing. The 6 matrices below are the most common time shapes the home cook encounters. Once you can see which matrix a recipe is building, you can predict its behavior before any heat is applied. Matrix 1. Liquid batter, the batter as vehicle. The first matrix is the loosest. A liquid batter is mostly water or milk or coconut milk, with flour suspended in it at low enough concentration that the mixture pours. Gluten development is minimal, intentionally. Overworked liquid batter becomes tough. The matrix's job is not to be the dish. The matrix's job is to carry the dish to a cooked state. The canonical Japanese example is tempura. The batter is cold water, often with ice, cake flour, sometimes a beaten egg, mixed with chopsticks just enough to wet the flour. Lumps are not only acceptable, they are desirable. The flour particles that did not fully hydrate will, in the fryer, give the coating its characteristic uneven crisp. Tempura is the opposite of bread in almost every variable. Bread wants warmth. Tempura wants cold. Cold suppresses gluten formation. Bread wants long kneading. Tempura wants almost no stirring. Bread wants the gluten network developed. Tempura wants it suppressed. This is the canonical matrix as opposite of dough. The point is not developing gluten. When you read a tempura recipe and it tells you to use ice water and to stop mixing while you can still see flour pockets, this is the variable being tuned. The Vietnamese banh xeo works on similar principles with different materials. The batter is rice flour, water, and turmeric. At its most minimal, only 2 ingredients. Rice flour has no gluten at all, so the cook does not have to suppress anything. They just have to get the hydration right and pour it thin onto a screaming hot pan. The batter cooks into a brittle lacework crust. The dish is named for the sound, xeo, the batter makes when it hits the oil. The matrix is, almost literally, the sizzle. The basic pancake batter is the simplest version of this matrix in wheat. Flour, milk, egg, a little fat, baking powder, salt. The cook is tuning hydration so the batter pours but does not run, and mixing so the gluten is barely awoken. A pancake that came out tough is one where the cook beat the batter into submission instead of folding it once and stopping. A note on safety for the fryer recipes in this matrix. Tempura wants oil at 170 to 180 degrees Celsius, high enough that the batter sets immediately, low enough that the coating doesn't darken before the shrimp inside is cooked. Use a small, heavy pot, half full at most. Drop the battered piece from close to the surface. Splashing from height puts hot oil onto your wrist. Keep a metal lid within arm's reach. If the oil ever flames, smother with the lid. Never pour water on an oil fire. The fryer is the section of the kitchen where the cook moves slowly on purpose. Matrix 2. Wet flour-based crust batter. The batter as disguise. The second matrix looks similar to the first. It is also pourable and flour-based, but it does a different job. Where the liquid batter of tempura is meant to read as light on the plate, the wet flour-based crust batter is meant to read as substantial. It coats, it thickens, it hides the texture of what is underneath. The Spanish calamares fritos is the cleanest example. Squid rings, slippery, mineral, somewhat alien on the tongue, are dredged through a wet flour batter, sometimes a simple slurry of flour and water, sometimes flour mixed with sparkling water or beer for extra lift, and dropped into hot oil. What arrives on the plate is no longer a squid ring. It is a golden, slightly puffed disc that happens to have squid inside it. The eater bites through a coat and into something tender. The batter has disguised the underlying texture. This is also why the calamares fritos batter usually has more flour relative to liquid than tempura. The cook wants a coat that has body. They want a slight, crunchy thickness, not a delicate veil. A reader who has tried both dishes will already have noticed this difference on the palate. The variable is the flour-to-water ratio. The same safety applies as the tempura matrix. 170 to 180 degrees Celsius oil, a small pot, the metal lid ready, drops from close to the surface. The hazard is the same. The matrix is what changes. Matrix 3, pancake cake matrix, ratio-driven, butter and egg heavy. The third matrix is where batters become cakes. The defining variable is richness. These batters carry significant butter and egg in proportion to flour, and what they produce is not a crepe, but a tender, structured small cake. The Japanese dorayaki is one of the world's tidiest demonstrations of how ratio drives the matrix. Flour, eggs, sugar, a touch of honey and mirin, baking soda, the smallest amount of water. 2 thin pancakes on a griddle, slightly larger than the palm, sandwiched around a layer of sweet azuki bean paste. The matrix does 2 things in one bite. The cake is just sturdy enough to hold the filling, and just tender enough to eat clean. With the lacquered golden color the honey gives, the matrix is tuned at the seam between pancake and small cake. The French Madeleine is the same family taken further. Almost equal weights of flour, sugar, butter, and egg. A whisked batter rested cold, so the gluten relaxes and the butter firms. A scalding hot oven so the cold butter, on contact with the hot mold, snaps into steam and pushes the famous bossie, the hump, upward in the first 30 seconds before the cake sets around it. Gluten is held quiet. Fat is high. Water is low. Leavening is partly chemical and partly thermal. This matrix is forgiving in a way the others are not. Rest the batter overnight. Scale by weight rather than volume. The matrix is ratio-driven. The proportions are the recipe, not the technique. If a dorayaki or madeleine comes out wrong, the first place to look is the ratio, not the method. Matrix 4. Egg, flour, vegetable hybrid. Vegetable carries the flavor. Batter binds. The fourth matrix is where the matrix stops trying to be the dish and starts being the glue. Egg, flour, vegetable hybrids, the savory pancake family, are not about the batter. They are about the vegetable inside the batter. The batter's job is to bind, to hold the vegetable in place over heat, and to provide enough structure that the eater can pick it up and bite it. The Korean pajeon is the example most home cooks will encounter first. A simple wheat flour batter, sometimes a touch of rice flour for crispness, is poured onto a hot boiled pan, then loaded with scallions cut to length, and often seafood, clam, oyster, squid. The pajeon's flavor comes from the scallions and the seafood. The batter's flavor is, deliberately, almost nothing. If a pajeon tastes flat, the answer is not a richer batter. The answer is more or better scallions and the dipping sauce on the side. The Japanese takoyaki demonstrates the same principle in a different geometry. A thin batter is poured into a cast iron mold with hemispherical depressions. A small piece of octopus is dropped into each. Scallion and pickled ginger and tempura bits are added, and the cook flips each ball, with a long pick, into a sphere over high heat. The batter's job is to encapsulate the flavor inside, octopus, the savory broth notes from the batter, often a dashi-based liquid rather than water. The pickled ginger is what the eater tastes. The matrix is the wrapper. The takoyaki iron sits at around 200 to 220 degrees Celsius. The risk in this matrix is not oil fire. The oil quantity is small, but contact burn, a hot pan, a long pick, and a quick rotating motion that the cook does many times in succession. Use the pick, never the fingertip. Flick from the side, not from above. A new cook will burn the first batch, both literally and in terms of the food. That is the matrix teaching itself. A reader who has eaten okonomiyaki or a Vietnamese banh chat will already see the pattern. The batter is small and quiet. The dish lives in what the batter holds. Matrix 5, enriched yeasted dough, gluten plus fat plus leavening plus time. The fifth matrix is where the variables collide most visibly. An enriched yeasted dough, brioche, cinnamon roll, milk bread, panettone, challah, is a wheat dough that has been loaded with butter, eggs, sugar, and milk, and is then leavened with yeast over hours. The cook is asking the dough to do almost everything at once. Develop a gluten network strong enough to trap the gas of fermentation, while carrying so much fat and sugar that the network is constantly being interrupted, while supporting enough hydration to be tender, and over a time long enough that the yeast can do its slow work, but short enough that the butter does not weep out. The cinnamon roll is the home baker's clearest entry into this matrix. The dough is made the night before. Bread flour, milk, sugar, butter, eggs, yeast, salt. It is kneaded longer than a lean bread dough because the fat is fighting gluten formation and the network has to be built against a resistance. A slow first rise in the fridge develops flavor. Then rolled out, spread with butter and cinnamon sugar, rolled into a log, cut into rounds, proved a second time, baked. The eater wants a crumb that is soft and pillowy, a butter and cinnamon swirl that is moist but not raw, and a slight pull when the rolls are pulled apart. To get there, the dough wants 60 to 65% hydration. 8 to 10 minutes of kneading in a stand mixer, longer by hand, and a second proof, long enough for the yeast to deliver loft. The cinnamon roll is where the safety question shifts from oil to internal temperature. A finished roll wants an internal temperature of 88 to 96 degrees Celsius. The center should not be doughy. Underbaked enriched dough is not unsafe in itself. It is gummy. The food safety question arises when the roll includes a perishable filling. Cream cheese frosting added before baking. A custard-filled variant. Rolls with perishable fillings should be refrigerated if not eaten the same day. The filling decides. The home baker who learns this matrix learns most of the enriched dough family at once. Challah, brioche, Japanese shokopan, Mexican concha. Variations of the same time shape with different fat ratios and egg loads. Matrix 6. Custard coagulation matrix. Egg set as matrix. The sixth matrix leaves flour behind altogether. A custard does not get its structure from gluten or starch, with rare exceptions. It gets its structure from the coagulation of egg protein under controlled heat. The cook is asking the egg to set into a gel, a soft, tender, holding its shape gel, without curdling, without separating, and without becoming rubbery. The French crème anglaise is the precursor matrix. Egg yolks, sugar, milk, vanilla, gently heated and stirred. The cook is bringing the mixture to roughly 80 to 85 degrees Celsius. Hot enough that the egg proteins begin to denature and thicken the milk. Cool enough that they do not curdle into scrambled eggs in milk. The sauce coats the back of a spoon. It is not a solid. It is a stirred custard that will never set further, because the cook will pull it from the heat at exactly the right moment. The creme caramel is the set version of the same matrix. The same egg milk sugar base, now poured over a layer of dry caramel in the bottom of a ramekin, is baked in a water bath at 150 degrees Celsius, until the center reaches an internal temperature of 75 to 80 degrees Celsius. The water bath is the safety mechanism. It surrounds the custard with water, which cannot exceed 100 degrees Celsius, so the custard cooks gently from all sides. Without it, the edges would curdle while the center was still raw. A creme caramel that has set evenly all the way through and has a glassy caramel layer at the bottom is the matrix executing on every variable correctly. Two safety notes are non-negotiable here. First, caramel for creme caramel. Sugar caramelizes between 170 and 190 degrees Celsius. Caramel sticks to skin and continues to burn after it has stuck. A sugar burn is worse than an equivalent oil burn. Never add water to hot caramel without standing back. The spatter is violent. Keep ice water ready in case of accidental contact. Pour into ramekins from short range, not from height. Second, custard internal temperature for vulnerable eaters. The crème anglaise base sits below the pasteurization range of egg for very young, very old, pregnant, or immunocompromised eaters. The cook should either use pasteurized eggs or verify with a thermometer that the 80 to 85 degrees Celsius window held long enough to inactivate salmonella. The set crème caramel, baked to 75 to 80 degrees Celsius internal in a water bath, is on the safer side. But the same precaution applies if the cook is uncertain. The cook who can read these 6 matrices can place most baked or fried or set things in the world's cuisines into the right family. A Korean hotteok is matrix 5 with sugar inside. A French clafouti is matrix 1 baked instead of fried. A Spanish flan is matrix 6. The names change, the variables do not. 4. The same dough in different traditions. Almost every cuisine in the world has some variant of pancake, some variant of bread, some variant of fried batter coating, some variant of egg-set custard. The variables in Chapter 2 are the same everywhere. Starch plus water plus heat plus fat plus, optionally, leavening. What changes from tradition to tradition is the tuning of the variables and the intent of the matrix. Japanese doughs and batters tend to suppress gluten on purpose. Tempura's cold water and minimal mixing. Doriyaki's tender rise. Takoyaki's quick-setting binder. Even Japanese breads, shokupan, are tender, using the tengjong technique, pre-cooking a portion of flour and water into a paste to produce a soft crumb. The aesthetic is tenderness over chew. French doughs and pastries make a virtue of layering and lamination. Croissant, puff pastry, millefeuille, the choux paste that becomes éclair. The cook builds a matrix in which fat and flour alternate in physical layers, so steam in the oven separates them into the famous flaky structure. The aesthetic is visible structure. Vietnamese doughs lean on rice flour, which has no gluten at all, and on the brittle, lacy crust as the desired texture. Banh xeo, banh cot, banh cuon are all rice flour matrices. The aesthetic is brittle, sheer. Korean batters split into 2 families. The Pajeonjeon family, which is wheat flour based and binds vegetables, and the rice flour family, Songpyeon, Tok, closer in structure to mochi. The same kitchen makes both. Italian dough is structurally almost always a single thing. Hydrated wheat with salt, sometimes eggs, allowed to develop a strong gluten network and shaped into pasta, pizza, or bread. The aesthetic is chew. Even Italian cakes, panettone, pandoro, lean on enriched yeasted matrices that take many hours of fermentation. Levantine and Eastern Mediterranean doughs, pita, lavash, manakish, fatire, are flatbreads built around the moment the dough hits a screaming hot oven, and steam inside flashes off, separating the bread into 2 thin layers, the pita pocket. The aesthetic is thin, charred, supple. Mexican has corn masa as its central matrix, mixed hemelized corn ground to a paste, with no gluten to speak of. The tortilla, the tamale, the gordita are masa matrices. The aesthetic is pliable, slightly grainy. Indian has a vast taxonomy of breads, chapati, paratha, naan, kulcha, puri, bhatura, that range across all the variables. Lean, unleavened chapati, layered with ghee, paratha, yeasted naan, yogurt-leavened kulcha, deep-fried steam-puffed, puri. Reading an Indian bread recipe through the matrix lens is one of the fastest ways to see how 5 variables generate dozens of distinct breads. The point of this short tour is the same as the parallel section in Chapter 1. Once the cook can read the matrix beneath the recipe, the cook can read a foreign tradition's bread and predict, before they have tried it, what its texture will be. They can also read a failure in their own kitchen and understand which variable was off. 5. Common misunderstandings. More flour fixes a wet dough? Sometimes. Often the dough was correctly hydrated and the cook simply did not let the flour absorb. Rest 5 minutes before adding more flour. The gluten network needs time to bind the water already present. A dough fixed by adding flour past correct hydration will be tougher and drier than one that was rested. Lumps in a batter are a problem. For tempura and banzio, lumps are a feature. They are dry flour pockets that, in the fryer, give the coating its characteristic uneven, lacy crust. Whisking the lumps out of a tempura batter is whisking the tempura out of the tempura. The same principle applies, more gently, to pancake batter. Custard curdles because the heat was too high. Yes, but specifically, the egg proteins reached coagulation temperature in a small hot spot. The bottom of the pan where the cook was not stirring, or the edge of a ramekin without a water bath. The fix is not lower heat alone. The fix is even heat. Heavy bottom pan, water bath, constant stirring with a silicone spatula along the bottom. Cold butter is for biscuits. Soft butter is for cakes. Mostly correct, but the underlying rule is what the cook should remember. Cold butter cut into flour interrupts gluten. Soft butter creamed with sugar aerates. Two different jobs. Knowing what the butter is doing, in each case, makes the temperature choice obvious. This is how croissant must be made. Many baking traditions surround their canonical doughs with rules that read as absolute. They are usually descriptions of one good way. Banzio varies widely by region of Vietnam. Northern, central, and southern versions look and taste different. Tempura is a complete reinterpretation of Portuguese peixinhos da horta, the dish that arrived in 16th century Nagasaki and was reworked into something the Portuguese would not recognize. Pajeon has many forms: kimchi pajeon, oyster pajeon, scallion only, and Korean households will argue about which is the right one. The authentic way should be heard as one good way among many. The didn't work diagnostic. When a dough or batter does not produce what the cook expected, there are 6 places the failure most often lives. The reader can walk down this list, in order, against any failed dough or batter. The thing in the pan is not what the recipe promised. Ask in order. Gluten? Was the matrix tough? Test. Think about how much you mixed. Did you whisk past the point where the flour was incorporated? If yes, the matrix was overworked. Fix. Next time mix less, fold instead of whisk, accept lumps. Fat. Was the matrix dense, heavy, leaden? Test. Think about when fat went in. Did you melt cold butter that was supposed to stay cold? Did you use the wrong fat? If yes, the interruption did not happen. Fix. Keep cold fat cold. Do not let butter for biscuits or pastry warm above roughly 15 degrees Celsius while you work. Water. Was the matrix dry, crumbly, would not come together? Test. Think about hydration. Was the flour absorbent, whole wheat, very fresh flour, and did the recipe call for AP flour quantities? If yes, the hydration was low for that flour. Fix. Add water a tablespoon at a time. Rest. Check again. Check. The leavener. Is the baking powder still active? Drop a pinch in hot water. It should fizz. Is the yeast alive? A pinch in warm water with sugar. It should foam in 10 minutes. Did the recipe rest too long for chemical leavener or too short for yeast? Fix. Replace the leavener if dead. Adjust timing if not. Heat. Was the matrix raw inside, burned outside, or simply the wrong texture? Test. Think about temperature. Was the oven actually at the temperature you set? Oven thermometers exist for a reason. Was the oil at the right temperature for tempura, 170 to 180 degrees Celsius, and not at 140 or 220? Fix. Thermometer in oven and in fryer. The setting on the dial is a hope, not a fact. Time. Was the matrix correct but off shape? Test. Think about when each operation happened. Was the yeasted dough proved long enough? Was the custard pulled at the right second? Fix. Timing in baking is non-negotiable. Use a thermometer for the points that matter. 88 to 96 degrees Celsius internal for the cinnamon roll. 75 to 80 degrees Celsius internal for the creme caramel. If the matrix is still wrong after running through these 6, the recipe itself may be poorly written. That is also a real condition, and it cannot be fixed at the stove. This list, like the 7-axis flat taste diagnostic in Chapter 1, is meant to be memorized. It runs in maybe a minute. The cost of running it is small. The cost of repeating the same failure 3 times is the rest of the loaf, the rest of the batter, the rest of the evening. Chef's view. In the small Hanoi kitchen where I trained for a year, the morning baker, who made the day's banh mi rolls and the few croissants the cafe sold, had an unusual habit. Every dough she made, she pinched off a small piece, rolled it into a ball, dropped it into a clear glass of warm water, and set it on the counter next to her main batch. I asked her, the first week, what the ball was for. She said she was waiting for it to float. When the small ball rose to the surface, the main dough was ready to shape. It was, she said, a more honest test than a watch. I thought it was a folk technique, charming but imprecise. After watching her work for 3 months, I understood it was the opposite. The ball in water is a real-time measurement of the dough's gas-to-mass ratio. As the yeast fermented, gas was trapped in the gluten network and the density dropped. When the density dropped below that of water, the ball floated. The main dough, being larger but otherwise identical, was at the same density at the same moment. There was no guessing whether it had risen enough. The water answered. She had been taught the technique by her grandmother, who had been taught by hers. None of them used the words density or gas-to-mass ratio. They had a glass of water and a small ball of dough, and they trusted the test. I think about that glass often. The matrix variables, gluten, fat, water, leavening, are, in the end, the cook's mental model of what is happening inside an opaque bowl of dough. They give the cook names for what is being tuned. The names let the cook predict, troubleshoot, transfer skill across dishes. But the variables themselves are not the dough. The dough is the dough. Stops thinking in variables and starts feeling them through the hands. The dough is too sticky, she dusts. The dough is too tight, she rests it. The pancake batter is too thin, she folds in another spoon and stops. None of this is calculation. It is the variables having moved from the head into the fingertips. This is the trajectory of every baking skill: the recipe, the variables, the diagnostic, and eventually the hands. The hands are the destination, the first three are the road. 9. Summary. The reader who has finished this chapter has gained, at minimum, 4 things. First, the variables: gluten, fat, water, leavening, plus heat and time. The cook can now read any dough or batter recipe through these 6 dials and predict, before mixing, what the result will be. Second, the 6 matrices: liquid batter, wet flour crust batter, pancake cake, egg flour vegetable hybrid, enriched yeasted dough, custard. Most baked or fried or set things in the world's kitchens are one of these 6, with national tuning. Third, the diagnostic. When a dough or batter does not produce what the cook expected, the 6-question list runs through the most common failures in order. The first answered question is the fix. Fourth, the cross-cuisine pattern. A French croissant, a Korean pajan, a Vietnamese banh xeo, a Japanese tempura, an Indian parafa are not separate skills. They are the same small set of variables tuned in different directions toward different time shapes. What the reader has not gained is a finished recipe collection. That is the rest of the site. This chapter is a frame. The recipes are where the frame meets the bowl. For the worked examples, see tempura shrimp, the madeleine, and the crème anglaise base. For the underlying chemistry, see protein coagulation, starch thickening, and custard preparation.